Think for a moment about your earliest childhood memory. What is it that sticks out to you? For me, one of my earliest childhood memories is learning how to pray, but in Dutch. See, at the end of a meal, my dad would say the Lord's Prayer in Dutch, and I would repeat it dutifully, line by line. I didn't really understand the words, but I forced my mouth to make those foreign sounds. And I practiced until I could do it by heart. Now, another memory that sticks out to me is taking the bus with my grandmother. We would go to visit her father, my great-grandfather, downtown, where he lived in a nursing home. And when I would see him, I would sit on his lap, and like happens in many different cultures, he would start bouncing me on his knees, and he would sing this melodious tune in Dutch. And as the tune increased in speed, then the nearly unexpected would happen at the end, and I would drop through his legs, and I would squeal with delight. It was so fun to hear these familiar yet also foreign words, and to experience this anticipation of what I knew was coming next. For me, this sets the stage of combining the foreign of another language and the familiar of family. And this is what started me on a journey of becoming a global citizen. So join me on a journey of a 3-step stage to becoming a global citizen. Now, the first step is to be you. Now, many of you here grew up in a household where more than one language was spoken. And oh, that makes me so jealous. I primarily grew up in a monolingual English-speaking household. Okay, now I told you I heard snippets of Dutch and I learned to pray in Dutch, but beyond that, my experience was primarily in English. You see, my grandfather moved to the United States in 1952 when he was 40 years old. And upon arriving in the United States, he wanted to create a new identity. And for him, that meant forgetting and covering up his old identity of speaking Dutch. Dutch was reserved for just the relatives or for letters back to the homeland. With his family, with my grandma, with my dad, and with my aunt, he spoke English, and that set the trajectory for my life. Yet, I still remember when my cousins came to visit from the Netherlands, suddenly it was like this world became alive. My dad and my cousins conversed, and the conversation went from English to Dutch, back to English, and back to Dutch, and I was just mesmerized. I could only understand half of it, but I understood the familiar tones, and I tried to catch these familiar sounds, and I just wondered, what were they saying? I wanted to know. I wanted to unlock this mystery that was another language. When I went to high school, I finally got to enroll in Spanish class, and I was so excited. Day 1 of Spanish class, the teacher walked into the classroom, and she started speaking all in Spanish. And I just sat mesmerized. Every word was new. And once again, there were foreign sounds and they were different and I didn't understand. She would reach into a backpack and pull something out and say the Spanish word for it. And I tried to figure out what each thing meant and just tried to solve this mystery. She rolled her R's flawlessly. And it was inspirational. And then, while my classmates struggled to memorize these vocabulary lists and to determine the difference in the past tense verbs, I loved studying the grammar. I got to lean into my little grammar nerd heart and talk about this in a foreign language. Not only did my vocabulary increase, because now I learned new words, and not only did I get to learn more about my own language through learning the grammar of another language, my worldview also increased. I learned about another culture. We sang childlike songs in Spanish. We watched these cartoons and these Christmas movies in Spanish. And it was like a whole new world. It was like I could see things in more vibrant colors. And it really inspired me to want to travel more, to learn what it's really like. Now, I like talking with other people. And part of learning another language meant that I even got a bigger audience. I could share my ideas with more people. But it also meant I could learn from more people. I could hear about their experiences. I could learn about their heritage and their culture and taste their food and learn about how they saw the world. And this inspired me to travel more, to learn more, and to just become a broader, more well-traveled global citizen. Now, this brings me to stage 2 of becoming a global citizen, which is be goo. Now, think back to science class where you learned about butterflies. I think we all learned that the caterpillar starts out as a caterpillar, makes the cocoon, and then emerges as a beautiful monarch butterfly. My science classes kind of skipped over that cocoon part. I always knew it existed, but what happens in the cocoon? Did you know that the caterpillar, once they make the cocoon, they basically digest themselves? They liquefy. They turn into goo. That sounds pretty gross. And it contrasts with that beautiful butterfly that I always had imagined at the end. I didn't really give much thought about what happened in the cocoon. Now, someone asked me the other day, do you think a caterpillar knows what's going to happen in a cocoon when it makes it? Now, I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that that state of goo is a state of great transformation. Now, how does this relate to being a global citizen? Well, I had originally envisioned myself as a very brave, very adventurous global traveler. And the first time I went overseas, I traveled with my dad. We went to the Netherlands and we saw the sights. And we played this little game. We would walk in the door talking to each other in Dutch. And if the shopkeeper came to us and spoke to us in Dutch, we felt like we had won, like we had cracked the code. And if the shopkeeper came and spoke to us in English, we knew that our pronunciation and our grammar needed a little bit of work. Okay, and it was fun being a tourist. But then I had a longer overseas experience. Prior to this, I had been treating the world kind of like a museum. I was living in another culture, using other languages, which had really awakened in me a new part of my soul. And then, unlike a museum, there was no exit. After a while, homesickness crept in. I felt lonely. I couldn't leave my language classroom and retreat to my own familiar culture and bedroom. I couldn't just check out. And it was hard. Research shows that speaking in another language can change your personality, and it's true. I went from a vibrant linguistic risk taker in my foreign language classrooms, where I tried to express myself creatively in other words, in other languages, and other structures, to someone who had a really limited vocabulary. And I couldn't show the depths of who I was. And I felt lonely. I felt disoriented. I felt like I was undoing my soul. Who was I? I was transforming, and it was painful. I had envisioned this beautiful butterfly experience, and yet I was solidly stuck in the goo stage. And it was hard. But thankfully, after a while in the cocoon, a beautiful butterfly does emerge. And that brings me to point number 3 of being a global citizen, which is to be made new. Now, despite this kind of negative experience where I was homesick and I left earlier than I planned, I still decided that I was going to move overseas. And prior to this, I went to a training seminar, and in this training seminar, they referenced cultural anthropologist Sherwood Lingenfelter. Lingenfelter's claim was that to successfully live overseas, you needed to become a 150% person. Now, I'm pretty bad at math, and that even seemed a little bit unrealistic. But what he explained was, when you have your home culture and your culture of origin, at the beginning, that's 100%. But when you move overseas, you become less like that home culture, and you have to change. He painted the picture of a square. He said you start out basically as a square, but imagine if you try to roll that square along. It's really hard. These 4 corners don't make it roll very smoothly. But with time and continued persistence, those corners will start to roll. They'll start to shape and soften. They'll start to smooth out. But it's not going to become a circle. First, we'll get a hexagon, and with continued pushing, we'll get more of an octagon. You'll get to be a shape that isn't square, isn't circle, and doesn't really have a standard shape. And that's what it's like to be a 150% person. You retain your own culture, but you acquire more of the culture of where you live. Living in Lithuania, I've learned more about the balance between work and life. Living in Asia taught me the beauty of valuing the collective and the group over the individual. Living in the Middle East taught me about the beauty of hospitality and warmth. All of these experiences helped shape me who I am today. And this is something that I want to leave you with. Lean into your passions. Pursue what you're interested in. Expect that at times there's going to be something disorienting and uncomfortable. But through it all, through all these global experiences, may you too experience the joy of being made new. Thank you.